I stood in my driveway on that freezing February morning in Maplewood, Ohio, staring at the bright orange citation stuck to my mailbox, and my blood pressure spiked higher than it had in years. The fine was for $300. $300 for alleged dog waste violations that supposedly occurred during the massive snowstorm we'd had 2 weeks ago. The snow was still piled 4 feet high in most yards, gray and crusty from road salt, and somehow the HOA claimed they'd found evidence of my dog's poop beneath it. My name is Paul Garrison, and I'm a 42-year-old software engineer who moved to Brookshire Estates 3 years ago thinking it would be a quiet suburban paradise. I have a golden retriever named Max who's 8 years old and the most well-behaved dog you'll ever meet. I'm religious about picking up after him. I carry waste bags in every jacket pocket in my car, and I've even got a dispenser mounted by my back door. The accusation was absurd, but what made my jaw clench was the signature at the bottom of the citation. Linda Peterson, HOA president. Linda was exactly what you'd picture when someone says the word Karen. She was 47, had that specific haircut that screamed, "I want to speak to the manager," and she'd made my life miserable since I'd moved in. She'd cited me for having my trash cans visible from the street for more than 12 hours, for planting flowers that weren't on the approved list, and once for having a package sitting on my porch for 2 days. But this was different. This was a lie. I pulled out my phone and called the HOA office immediately. The line rang 4 times before Linda herself picked up. Brookshire Estates, HOA, Linda speaking. Linda, this is Paul Garrison on Willow Creek Drive. I just got a citation for dog waste violations during the snowstorm. This is ridiculous. I always pick up after Max. Mr. Garrison, we have photographic evidence of violations in the common area near your property. The fine stands. Her voice was clipped, professional, and absolutely infuriating. What photographic evidence? The snow is still on the ground. How could you possibly have evidence of anything? We conducted an inspection yesterday when temperatures rose. The snow melted enough in certain areas to reveal multiple violations. Your property is the closest to the affected area, and you're the only resident in that section with a large dog. That doesn't prove anything. Other people walk their dogs through there. People from outside the neighborhood even cut through there. The HOA board has voted, Mr. Garrison. You have 30 days to pay the fine or we'll place a lien on your property. Have a good day. She hung up before I could respond. I stood there in the cold, my breath making clouds in the air, and felt rage building in my chest. A lien on my property. Over dog poop I didn't even leave there. This was insane. I went inside and immediately started researching. I'm a problem solver by nature. That's what I do for a living, find issues in code and fix them. This was just another problem that needed solving. After about an hour of searching, I stumbled onto something interesting. Pet waste DNA testing. There were actually laboratories that specialized in this. Apartment complexes and some HOAs used them to identify pets whose owners weren't cleaning up after them. You'd register your pet's DNA, and then any waste found could be tested and matched back to the specific animal. The company I found was called Poo Prints, based out of Tennessee. They had a whole system set up. The registration kit was $60, and testing a sample cost around $75. It wasn't cheap, but it was a lot better than $300 for something I didn't do. I called them that afternoon. A friendly customer service representative named Jennifer walked me through the process. So I can register my dog's DNA, and then if we test the waste that was found, it'll prove it's not from my dog, I asked. Exactly. Our tests are 99.9% accurate. They're actually admissible in court if it comes to that. We work with a lot of HOAs and property management companies. What if I wanted to test the sample without the HOA knowing? There was a pause. Well, you'd need to collect the sample yourself. We provide collection kits. As long as the sample is properly preserved and documented, we can test it. Though I should mention, for legal purposes, having a witness or photographs of the collection helps establish chain of custody. Perfect. Send me everything. I hung up feeling better than I had all day. Then I called my buddy Mike, who lived 2 streets over. Mike was a paralegal and had dealt with HOA issues before with his own property. When I explained the situation, he let out a long whistle. Man, Linda's really got it out for you, but DNA testing, that's actually brilliant. I've heard of it but never seen anyone actually do it. Will it hold up if I need to fight this? If you document everything properly, yeah. Take photos, get witnesses if you can. Make sure the chain of custody is clear. And Paul, if you prove it's not Max's, you need to find out whose it is. Because if Linda's fining you without actual evidence, that's abuse of power. The HOA board could remove her for that. That thought made me smile for the first time all day. I'll keep you posted. The DNA registration kit arrived 3 days later. It was surprisingly simple. I just had to swab the inside of Max's cheek, let it dry, and send it back in the prepaid envelope. Max thought it was a game, wagging his tail the whole time while I collected the sample. I sent it off that same day with expedited shipping. While I waited for confirmation that Max was in the system, I decided to do some reconnaissance. The common area Linda had mentioned was a small green space between my street and the next one over. It was maybe half an acre, with a walking path, some benches, and a few trees. During the summer, it was actually pretty nice. Now it was a slushy mess as the snow slowly melted. I walked over there around 4 in the afternoon, when the light was still good. I brought my phone and started taking pictures. There were indeed several piles of dog waste visible now that some of the snow had melted. They were frozen solid, but definitely there. I counted 6 distinct piles. I photographed each one from multiple angles, making sure to capture the surrounding area so the locations were clear. Then I started thinking about what Mike had said. If I proved it wasn't Max's waste, whose was it? I stood there looking at the piles, trying to think logically. Linda had been so certain, so quick to find me. She'd said I was the closest property owner with a large dog, but that wasn't quite true. The common area bordered 4 properties. Mine was one. Then there was old Mrs. Henderson, who didn't have any pets. The Chens had 2 small dogs, maybe 15 pounds each. And then there was the property on the corner, Linda Peterson's house. Linda had a dog. I'd seen it a few times when I'd driven past. A big German shepherd, easily 70 or 80 pounds. His name was something like Duke or Brutus, something tough sounding. I'd never actually seen Linda walking the dog, but then again, I wasn't exactly watching her house. The more I thought about it, the more suspicious I became. What if this was projection? What if Linda wasn't picking up after her own dog and was blaming me to deflect attention? I walked around the common area slowly, studying the paths. There was a gate in Linda's back fence that opened directly onto the green space. She could let her dog out and it would have immediate access to the area. My yard didn't connect at all. I'd have to walk Max down the street and around to get here. Why would I do that when I had a perfectly good fenced backyard? This was making more and more sense. I took more photos, including several of the gate from Linda's property and the clear path from there to where most of the waste was located. When I got home, I sat down and made a timeline. The snowstorm had hit on January 23rd. It had dumped about 18 inches on us over 2 days. The snow hadn't started significantly melting until this week, when we'd had a few days in the 40s. Linda had issued my citation on February 12th. That meant she'd done her inspection on the 11th, probably. I checked the weather history on my phone. February 11th had been 46 degrees, sunny. The snow would have melted enough to reveal anything underneath in exposed areas. But here was the thing. It had snowed again briefly on February 1st, just a couple of inches. And before that, we'd had consistently below freezing temperatures since the original storm. That meant any waste left out there had been deposited either during the brief warm-up around February 10th or 11th, or it had been there since before the big January storm. Max and I hadn't walked anywhere near that common area in months. During the winter, I usually just let him out in the backyard to do his business. It was easier, and I picked everything up once a week. I had waste removal logged in my phone's calendar app. I was that organized about it. The confirmation email from Pooh Prince came through on February 14th. Max was officially in their system. Now I needed to collect samples from the common area and send them in for testing. I called Jennifer back at Pooh Prince and ordered a collection kit. She walked me through the proper procedure. You want to wear gloves, collect the sample using the sterile bags provided, and make sure each sample is properly labeled with the location, date, and time of collection. Take photographs of the waste before you collect it and after, showing it in the bag. If you can get a witness to observe and sign an affidavit that you collected what you say you collected, even better. This is more involved than I thought. Chain of custody is important if there's going to be any legal challenge. You want to make absolutely sure no one can claim you tampered with anything or submitted false samples. The collection kit arrived on February 17th. That evening, I called Mike and asked if he'd come witness the collection. He agreed immediately. "This is the most interesting thing I've been involved with in months," he said. "HOA drama and DNA evidence. It's like CSI, Suburbia." We met at the common area at 6 in the evening. It was already getting dark, so I brought a high-powered flashlight. Mike brought a legal pad and his phone to take additional photos and notes. "Okay, CSI Paul, how do we do this?" Mike asked, grinning. "We document everything. Photo of each pile before collection, noting the exact location. Then I collect it using the sterile bags from the kit, seal it, label it, and you photograph me doing it and note the time and location." Got it. This is weirdly exciting. We spent the next 45 minutes carefully collecting 4 samples. I didn't take all 6 because I wanted to leave some in case I needed to bring anyone else out here to verify they existed. Each sample was frozen solid, which actually made collection easier. I could just scoop the whole thing without worrying about it being too messy. Mike took notes on everything. Sample 1, collected at 6:15 p.m. Eastern section near the oak tree, approximately 20 feet from the path. Sample 2, collected at 6:23 p.m. Western section near the bench. When we finished, my hands were freezing despite the gloves, but I felt triumphant. Mike signed a witness statement I'd drafted, confirming he'd watched me collect the samples and that I hadn't tampered with anything. "Now what?" he asked. "Now I send these to the lab and wait. Results take about a week. And if they prove it's not Max, then I go to war with Linda Peterson." Mike laughed, but I wasn't entirely joking. If Linda had fined me $300 for something I didn't do, either out of negligence or malice, there would be consequences. I sent the samples off the next morning with overnight shipping. The waiting was the hardest part. I kept checking my email obsessively, even though I knew it would take at least 5 days for results. During that week, I did more digging into the HOA bylaws and Ohio property law. I found some interesting things. First, HOAs in Ohio had to follow their own governing documents strictly. They couldn't just arbitrarily fine people. There had to be evidence, and homeowners had the right to contest fines. Second, if an HOA board member abused their power or violated the bylaws, they could be removed by a vote of the homeowners. Third, if an HOA placed an invalid lien on a property, the homeowner could sue for damages, and the HOA could be liable for legal fees. I also looked into Linda Peterson specifically. She'd been HOA president for 4 years. Before that, she'd been on the board for 2 years. She'd run unopposed for the last 2 elections because, frankly, no one else wanted the job. Most people in Brookshire Estates just wanted to live their lives without HOA drama. But I found several complaints about her on neighborhood forums and social media. Other homeowners talking about excessive fines, selective enforcement of rules, and general power-tripping behavior. One post caught my attention. It was from 18 months ago, from a homeowner named David. He'd complained that Linda had fined him for parking violations, but never enforced the same rules against her friends on the board. He'd eventually paid the fine just to avoid the hassle, but he'd noted something interesting. I've seen Linda's dog running loose in the common area multiple times, and I know for a fact she doesn't clean up after it, but she'll fine the rest of us for every little thing. I screenshot the post and saved it. If I needed to establish a pattern of behavior, this could be useful. The results came back on February 24th. I was sitting at my computer working from home when the email arrived. My heart rate picked up as I clicked it open. Dear Mr. Garrison, please find attached the results of your DNA analysis. 4 samples were tested against the registered profile for Max registration ID, MP 847,392. Results: Sample 1, no match. Sample 2, no match. Sample 3, no match. Sample 4, no match. None of the tested samples match the DNA profile of the registered animal. Detailed analysis report attached. I actually shouted in triumph, startling Max, who'd been sleeping under my desk. We got her, buddy. It's not you. But I wasn't done yet. Now came the interesting part. I called Pooh Prince back and asked to speak with Jennifer. Mr. Garrison, I see your results came back. Congratulations on clearing your dog. Thanks. Now here's my question. If I can get a DNA sample from another dog, can you test the waste samples against that dog's profile? Absolutely. You need to register the second dog and then we can run a comparison test. Is this the dog you suspect is actually responsible? Yes, but I don't own the dog. It belongs to my HOA president. There was a pause, then a barely suppressed laugh. Oh, this is good. Yes, we can definitely do that. But you'll need to get a DNA sample from the other dog. That might be tricky if you don't have access. Let me work on that. If I can get it, how fast can you turn around results? For a comparison test, 3 to 5 business days. Perfect. Send me another registration kit. I hung up and immediately started thinking through how I could get a DNA sample from Linda's German Shepherd. I couldn't exactly walk up to her door and ask to swab her dog's mouth. That would tip her off and potentially give her time to cover her tracks or claim I was harassing her. I needed to be smarter about this. I thought about it for a while, then called Mike again. You're not going to believe this, I said, and filled him in on the results. I knew it. I knew she was full of it. So what's the plan? I need to get DNA from her dog. Any ideas? Mike was quiet for a moment. Does she ever take the dog to a groomer or a vet? I have no idea, but that's actually a great angle. Let me do some research. I spent the next few hours playing detective. I checked Linda's social media, which was mostly public. Her Facebook page was a goldmine. She posted constantly about her dog, Duke. Pictures of Duke, stories about Duke, complaints about how expensive Duke's grooming was. And conveniently, she'd tagged a local grooming business in several posts, Pampered Paws Grooming in downtown Maplewood. I called Pampered Paws the next morning and asked to speak with the manager. A woman named Stacy answered. "Hi, this is awkward, but I need some information about a dog that I believe gets groomed there. A German Shepherd named Duke. Owner is Linda Peterson." "I can't give out client information, sir. Privacy policy." "I understand and I respect that. Let me explain the situation." I gave her the abbreviated version, the false accusation, the fine, the DNA testing. "I've proven it's not my dog's waste. Now I need to prove whose it actually is. If I could get a sample of Duke's fur from a grooming session, I could test it." Stacy was quiet for a long moment. "That's quite a story. And you said Linda Peterson?" "Yes, why?" "Let's just say she's not our favorite client. She's rude to the staff and constantly complains about prices she agreed to. But I still can't just give you her dog's fur. That would be unethical. What if I came in as a regular customer? If I happened to be there when Duke was getting groomed, and some fur happened to be available after the grooming session, and I asked for it?" Another pause. "We do sometimes give clients their pet's fur if they ask for it. Some people keep it for sentimental reasons or use it for crafts. If you were in the shop, and Duke had just been groomed and there was fur available and you asked nicely, I suppose I couldn't control what you did with fur that was going to be thrown away anyway." I could hear the smile in her voice. "When's Duke's next appointment?" "I really shouldn't tell you that." A pause. "But hypothetically, if a large German Shepherd were scheduled for a full grooming this Saturday at 10 in the morning, and if someone happened to come into the shop around 11 or 11:30 to ask about our services, they might find fur available." "Thank you, Stacy. Hypothetically, I appreciate that." "Hypothetically, you're welcome. And off the record, I hope you nail her. She accused my groomer of cutting Duke wrong last month and left a nasty online review. It was completely false." Saturday morning, I was at Pampered Paws at 11:15. The shop smelled like dog shampoo and wet fur, and the sound of blow dryers filled the air. Stacy was at the front counter and gave me a subtle nod when I walked in. "Hi, I'm interested in learning about your grooming services," I said, probably a little too loudly. "Of course. Let me get you some information." She pulled out a brochure, then leaned in closer. "The German Shepherd just finished. Give me 5 minutes." I pretended to read the brochure while she disappeared into the back. She returned with a small paper bag, folded closed. She slid it across the counter while pointing at the price list in the brochure. "Our full grooming package is $75 and includes everything listed here," she said in a normal voice. Then, quieter, "Plenty of sample in there. Good luck." I took the bag, thanked her, and got out of there before Linda could potentially show up to pick up Duke. My heart was pounding like I'd just committed a heist. Technically, I hadn't done anything illegal. The fur was going to be thrown away anyway, but it still felt deliciously sneaky. At home, I carefully prepared the sample according to Pooh Prince instructions for fur samples. It required a few strands with the roots intact, sealed in a sterile bag. I sent it off that afternoon with overnight shipping, along with a request for expedited processing. This time, I paid extra for the fastest turnaround possible. The waiting was even more agonizing than before. I knew I had Linda dead to rights on the false accusation, but if I could prove her dog was actually responsible for the waste, this went from me defending myself to me exposing hypocrisy and abuse of power. The $300 fines deadline was creeping up. I had until March 14th to pay or contest it. I'd already drafted a formal letter of contest, but I'd been holding off sending it until I had all my evidence together. Duke's DNA profile was registered on March 2nd. The comparison test results came back on March 5th. Comparison analysis results. Samples 1 through 4 tested against DNA profile for Duke registration ID, MP 849,573. Results. Sample 1, positive match. Sample 2, positive match. Sample 3, positive match. Sample 4, positive match. All tested samples match the DNA profile of the registered animal with 99.9% certainty. I sat back in my chair and just smiled. I had her. Linda Peterson had fined me $300 for dog waste violations when her own dog was responsible for every single sample I'd tested. This was negligence at best and fraud at worst. I immediately compiled everything into a formal package. The original citation, my documentation of always cleaning up after Max, the DNA results clearing Max, photos of the common area showing the proximity to Linda's property, the gate from her yard to the common area, the DNA results proving Duke was responsible, Mike's witness statement, the weather data showing the timeline, everything. Then I drafted a letter, not to Linda but to the entire HOA board. Dear Brookshire Estates HOA board members, I am writing to formally contest the citation and fine issued to me by President Linda Peterson on February 12, 2026, for alleged pet waste violations. I have conducted an independent investigation and DNA analysis that proves the following. The waste in question did not come from my dog, Max. DNA testing by an accredited laboratory, poo prints, test results attached, definitively excludes Max as the source. The waste in question did come from the HOA president's dog, Duke. DNA testing by the same accredited laboratory, test, results attached, positively identifies Duke as the source of all tested samples. President Peterson issued this citation negligently or fraudulently, either failing to properly investigate before issuing fines or knowingly issuing false citations. This represents a serious abuse of power and violation of her duties as HOA president. I went on to demand the fine be rescinded, a formal apology be issued, and Linda Peterson be removed from her position as HOA president. I attached copies of all my evidence and sent certified copies to all 5 board members, including Linda. I also sent a copy to Mike for his review and to my own lawyer, a guy named Tom Breslin who I'd used when I bought my house. Tom called me the next day. Paul, this is fantastic. I've seen a lot of HOA disputes, but I've never seen anyone go to this length. The DNA evidence is airtight. You've documented everything properly. If they try to enforce this fine or place a lien, I'll bury them in paperwork. And honestly, Linda Peterson could face personal liability for abuse of power. What about her having to pay my costs? The DNA testing ran me almost $400 when it's all added up. Absolutely. We'll demand reimbursement for all costs incurred due to her false accusation. And Paul, you might want to consider a formal complaint to the Ohio Real Estate Commission. HOA board members can face sanctions for this kind of behavior. I hadn't even thought of that. Let's see how the board responds first. I want to give them a chance to do the right thing. You're more gracious than I'd be. I'll stand by for the next steps. The HOA board had an emergency meeting scheduled for March 8th. I knew this because one of the board members, a guy named Robert Chen, called me the day after he received my letter. Mr. Garrison, this is Robert Chen from the HOA board. I've reviewed your evidence. This is extremely concerning. We're holding an emergency session this Saturday at 9 a.m. at the community center. We'd like you to attend to present your findings. Will Linda be there? Yes, though she'll be defending her actions rather than presiding over the meeting. I'll be chairing it. And Mr. Garrison, between you and me, several of us have had concerns about Linda's judgment for a while now. This might be the catalyst for some necessary changes. Saturday morning, I dressed in business casual and brought 3 copies of my entire evidence package in neat folders. Mike came with me for moral support, and Tom Breslin joined us as my legal counsel. The community center was a small building near the neighborhood entrance, mostly used for meetings and the occasional event. The 5 board members were there. Robert Chen, who I'd spoken with, Margaret Sullivan, James Kowalski, Patricia Hernandez, and of course, Linda Peterson. There were also about a dozen other homeowners scattered around the room. Word had apparently gotten out that something interesting was happening. Linda sat at the far end of the table, her arms crossed, her expression furious. She'd clearly been informed that this wasn't going to go her way, but she was going to go down fighting. Robert called the meeting to order. We're here to address the formal contest filed by Paul Garrison regarding citation 2026-047, issued by President Peterson. Mr. Garrison, you have the floor. I stood up and walked to the front of the room. I'd practiced this presentation in my head a dozen times, but now that I was here, adrenaline was making my heart race. Thank you. On February 12th, I received a citation for $300 for alleged pet waste violations. I'm here today to prove that citation was false and issued either negligently or fraudulently. I went through everything methodically: the timeline, the location, the fact that I always clean up after Max and had no reason to walk him in that common area during winter. The DNA test results clearing Max. The photos showing Linda's property had direct access to the common area while mine didn't. And finally, the bombshell. The DNA results proving Linda's dog Duke was responsible. The room was dead silent as I presented. I could see Linda's face getting redder and redder. The other board members were looking at the evidence I'd provided them with what appeared to be shock and anger. When I finished, Robert looked directly at Linda. Linda, do you have a response to these allegations? Linda stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is absurd. Paul has obviously fabricated this evidence to get out of a legitimate fine. I personally inspected that common area and determined the waste was from his property based on proximity. Based on proximity. Margaret Sullivan spoke up. She was a retired teacher, probably in her 60s, with gray hair and sharp eyes. Linda, your property is closer to the common area than Paul's. By your own logic, you should have fined yourself. My property has a fence. Paul's dog must have gotten loose, or he walked it there. I jumped back in. I have 3 years of veterinary records showing Max is up to date on all vaccines and well cared for. I have receipts for waste bags purchased regularly. I have calendar logs of waste removal from my yard. And I have sworn witness testimony from my neighbor Mike Henderson regarding my responsible pet ownership. But none of that matters because the DNA evidence is conclusive. It's not my dog's waste, it's yours. You can't possibly have DNA from Duke. This is harassment. This is illegal. Tom Breslin stood up smoothly. Tom Breslin, representing Mr. Garrison. Mrs. Peterson, the DNA sample was obtained legally from fur that had been discarded at a grooming facility. There's no legal issue whatsoever. What is a legal issue is you issuing a $300 fine without proper investigation, potentially placing a lien on my client's property based on false allegations, and the fact that you've apparently been allowing your own dog to violate the same rules you're supposedly enforcing. Linda's face went from red to almost purple. I don't have to listen to this. I'm the president of this HOA and I have the authority to issue citations as I see fit. Not without evidence, you don't. This was James Kowalski, a middle-aged accountant who I'd only met once or twice. Linda, I've reviewed the bylaws. Citations require documented evidence and an opportunity for the homeowner to respond before fines are levied. You didn't follow procedure. And if Mr. Garrison's evidence is accurate, and I have no reason to believe it isn't, you've committed a serious breach of your duties. Patricia Hernandez, the fifth board member, nodded. I move that we immediately rescind Citation 2026-047 and issue a formal apology to Mr. Garrison. Second, said Robert immediately. All in favor? 4 hands went up. Linda kept her arms crossed. The motion passes. Mr. Garrison, your fine is rescinded and we apologize for this situation. Robert turned to Linda. Linda, I'm also calling for a vote of no confidence in your position as HOA president. Your actions here demonstrate poor judgment and abuse of authority. You can't do that, Linda shouted. Actually, we can, Margaret said calmly. It's in the bylaws, Article 7, Section 3. Any board member can be removed by a majority vote of the remaining board members if they fail to uphold their duties or act against the interests of the association. I watched this unfold with a sense of satisfaction I hadn't expected. I'd wanted to clear my name, but seeing Linda actually face consequences was something else entirely. I move for a vote of no confidence and removal of Linda Peterson as HOA president, Robert said formally. Second, James said. All in favor? 4 hands went up again. Linda stood there, shaking with rage. The motion passes. Linda, you're removed as president effective immediately. You'll remain on the board as a regular member until your term expires in 6 months, but you no longer have any executive authority. This is illegal. I'll sue all of you. Tom spoke up again. Mrs. Peterson, I'd strongly advise against that. My client has grounds to sue you personally for the costs he incurred proving your false allegations. If you pursue legal action, we'll countersue and also file complaints with the state. You should consider yourself lucky that this is ending here. Linda grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door, but before she left, she turned and glared at me. You're going to regret this, Paul Garrison. You have no idea what you've started. She slammed the door behind her. The room was silent for a moment, then one of the homeowners in the audience started clapping. Others joined in. I felt my face flush with embarrassment and pride at the same time. Robert cleared his throat. Okay, let's settle down. Mr. Garrison, again, our apologies. The board will reimburse you for all reasonable expenses incurred in defending yourself against the false citation. Please submit an itemized list. Thank you. I appreciate the board taking this seriously. The meeting wrapped up shortly after. Robert was elected temporary president, and they scheduled a special election for a permanent replacement. As people filed out, several homeowners came up to thank me and share their own stories about Linda's overzealous enforcement. An elderly woman named Dorothy pulled me aside. She fined my son $50 for parking in my driveway overnight when he visited for Christmas. Said only residents could use driveways overnight. Meanwhile, her daughter's car has been parked in her driveway for 6 months straight. Thank you for standing up to her. Mike clapped me on the shoulder as we walked to our cars. Man, that was better than any TV drama. You absolutely destroyed her case. I just proved the truth. I couldn't have done it without your help. So what now? Think Linda's going to retaliate? I hope not, but I'm keeping all my documentation just in case, and Tom's on speed dial if she tries anything. I thought that would be the end of it. The fine was rescinded, Linda was no longer president, and I'd been vindicated. but Linda's parting threat kept echoing in my head. "You're going to regret this." The first sign of retaliation came 2 weeks later. I got a notice that my annual HOA dues were in arrears, which was impossible because they were automatically withdrawn from my bank account every January. I checked my bank records and confirmed the payment had gone through on January 15th, same as always. I called Robert Chen, who was now serving as interim president. "Robert, I just got a notice about unpaid dues, but I have bank records showing payment." "Hold on, let me check our records." I heard typing. "Paul, according to our system, we have no record of receiving your payment." "That's impossible. I have the confirmation right here. It was processed through the HOA's automated system. Send me the documentation. This is odd." "You're actually the third person to call about this today." That made my antenna go up. "Who else?" "The Chens, ironically no relation to me, and Dorothy Morrison. And now that I think about it, all three of you were vocal in supporting your case against Linda at the meeting. You think she's tampering with the payment records. I don't want to make accusations, but Linda still has access to the HOA management software since she's technically still on the board. Let me dig into this." 2 days later, Robert called an emergency board meeting. He discovered that Linda had indeed been accessing the HOA financial system and had deleted payment records for 5 different homeowners, all of whom had been present at the meeting where she was removed as president. This was no longer just a petty HOA dispute. This was fraud. Robert contacted Tom Breslin for legal advice, and Tom's recommendation was clear: file a police report. On March 27th, I found myself at the Maplewood Police Department giving a statement to Detective Sarah Mitchell. I explained the whole situation from the beginning: the false citation, the DNA evidence, Linda's removal, and now the apparent retaliation through tampering with financial records. "This is definitely fraud," Detective Mitchell said, making notes. "Tampering with official records, even HOA records, is illegal in Ohio. And if she's done it to multiple people, that's a pattern. We'll need to get the HOA's cooperation in providing full access to the system and documenting the tampering." Robert Chen and James Kowalski met with Detective Mitchell the next day and turned over all the HOA's financial records. A forensic audit revealed that Linda had deleted not just the 5 payment records we'd identified, but had also been skimming small amounts from the HOA's reserve fund for over a year. Nothing huge, $50 here, $100 there, but it added up to almost $3,000. The police executed a search warrant on Linda's home on April 2nd. I wasn't there for it, obviously, but Mike told me his wife drove past and saw 2 police cars in Linda's driveway. They seized her computer and found evidence of the deleted payments and the financial transfers to a personal account. Linda Peterson was arrested on April 7th and charged with theft, fraud, and tampering with records. Each charge was a misdemeanor on its own, but combined with the amount of money involved and the number of victims, the prosecutor decided to pursue it aggressively. The first court hearing was on April 21st. I attended along with Robert Chen and several other homeowners. Linda showed up with a lawyer, a tired-looking man in an ill-fitting suit who seemed like he knew he was fighting a losing battle. The prosecutor laid out the case efficiently. "Your Honor, the defendant, while serving as president of her homeowner association, issued false citations to residents, tampered with financial records when she was exposed, and embezzled nearly $3,000 from the association's funds. We have forensic evidence of the tampering, witness testimony regarding the false citations, and bank records showing the transfers to her personal account. Linda's lawyer tried to argue that HOA finances were complicated and mistakes happened, that Linda had intended to return the money, that the payment deletions were accidental. None of it was convincing. The judge, a stern woman named Judge Barbara O'Neill, listened to both sides and set bail at $10,000. Mrs. Peterson, these are serious charges. You held a position of trust and allegedly abused it repeatedly. Your trial date is set for June 4th. You're ordered to have no contact with any member of the Brookshire Estates, HOA board, or the complainants in this case. Linda made bail and was released, but the damage was done. Word spread through the neighborhood fast. The woman who'd been citing people for minor violations, who'd been so rigid about rules and regulations, had been arrested for fraud and theft. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. In the meantime, the HOA held its special election. Robert Chen ran for president and won in a landslide. His platform was simple: reasonable enforcement, transparency, and no more power trips. One of his first acts was to review and revise the citation process to require photographic evidence, opportunity for homeowners to respond before fines were levied, and a formal appeals process. Dorothy Morrison, the elderly woman who'd thanked me after Linda was removed, was elected to fill the board seat that Linda had vacated. The new board was a huge improvement. I submitted my itemized expenses to the HOA. $235 for DNA testing and related supplies, $75 for legal consultation with Tom Breslin before the board meeting, and my time and effort documented at 50 hours at a reasonable rate. The board approved reimbursement for my out-of-pocket expenses, though they couldn't legally pay me for my time. I didn't care about that part. Getting my $400 back and clearing my name was enough. The trial in June was relatively quick. Linda's lawyer tried to mount a defense, but the evidence was overwhelming. The forensic audit showed exactly when and how she deleted the payment records. Her bank statements showed the transfers from the HOA account, and I testified about the false citation, presenting all my DNA evidence. The prosecutor also called Stacy from Pampered Paws, who testified about Linda's generally difficult behavior, and confirmed that she'd provided me with Duke's fur legally. That testimony was important to establish that my evidence had been obtained properly. Linda took the stand in her own defense, which Tom Breslin later told me was a huge mistake. She tried to claim that she'd been under stress, that managing the HOA was overwhelming, that people were constantly breaking rules and she was just trying to maintain order. But under cross-examination, she fell apart. "Mrs. Peterson, why did you issue a citation to Mr. Garrison without confirming which dog was responsible for the waste?" the prosecutor asked. "I had reasonable belief it was his dog based on proximity." "But your own dog had even closer proximity to the common area, correct? I always clean up after Duke." "Then why did DNA testing prove that Duke was responsible for all 4 samples tested?" Linda didn't have a good answer. "The testing must have been flawed." "The testing was done by an accredited laboratory using the same methods accepted in courts across the country. Are you saying their science is wrong?" "I'm saying Paul Garrison had it out for me and manipulated the evidence." The prosecutor pulled out photos of Linda's backyard gate opening directly onto the common area. "Mrs. Peterson, isn't it true that your dog had unsupervised access to the common area through this gate? He doesn't go out there unsupervised." "Then how do you explain your neighbor's testimony that they've seen Duke in the common area alone on multiple occasions?" Linda's face flushed. "I don't know what they think they saw." The trial lasted 3 days. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Judge O'Neill scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. At sentencing, the judge was not lenient. "Mrs. Peterson, you held a position of trust in your community and you abused it repeatedly. You falsely accused residents, tampered with financial records in retaliation, and stole from your neighbors. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a pattern of behavior that demonstrates a fundamental disregard for the law and for the people you were supposed to serve." Linda was sentenced to 18 months in prison, 3 years of probation, and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA and to me personally for all costs I'd incurred, plus a $5,000 fine. Her lawyer immediately filed an appeal, but Tom told me it was unlikely to succeed given how solid the evidence was. The neighborhood slowly returned to normal after that. Robert Chen proved to be an excellent HOA president. He focused on actual community improvements rather than nitpicking violations. The common area got some much-needed landscaping. The pool was resurfaced. And most importantly, people weren't living in fear of getting ridiculous citations. I ran into Dorothy at the neighborhood 4th of July barbecue. She was carrying a plate of potato salad and had a huge smile on her face. "Paul, I wanted to thank you again. The neighborhood is so much better now. Robert actually listens to people instead of just barking orders. I'm glad it worked out. I just wanted to clear my name initially, but I'm happy it led to positive changes. Your dog Max should get a medal. He's the real hero here." I laughed. Max was currently lounging in the shade, perfectly content. He's just happy to be a dog. Speaking of which, whatever happened to Duke? Dorothy's expression turned sad. Linda's daughter took him. Poor thing, it wasn't his fault his owner didn't clean up after him. I heard he's doing well, though. The daughter actually brings him to the dog park regularly. That made me feel better. Duke was innocent in all this. He was just a dog doing dog things. It was Linda who'd failed in her responsibility and then tried to blame others for her negligence. As summer turned to fall, I found myself reflecting on the whole experience. What had started as a frustrating and infuriating false accusation had turned into something much bigger. I'd exposed corruption, helped improve my community, and learned a lot about standing up for myself. Tom Breslin called me in September with an update. Linda's appeal was denied. She reported to prison last week to begin serving her sentence, and the restitution payments are being garnished from her husband's wages, so you should start seeing checks soon. How much is she paying me? The court ordered her to reimburse you for all documented expenses, which came to $417, plus legal fees of $1,500, plus the original $300 fine as punitive damages. So just over $2,200 total. You'll get it in installments over the next year. I thought about that. $2,200 was nice, but it wasn't really about the money. It was about the principle. It was about not letting someone abuse their power and get away with it. Thanks, Tom. Send me your final bill and let's call this case closed. Already sent. And Paul, this was one of the most interesting cases I've worked on in years. If you ever need legal help again, give me a call, though hopefully you won't. Life returned to a comfortable routine after that. I worked. I spent time with Max. I attended the occasional HOA meeting where reasonable discussions happened instead of power trips and arbitrary citations. Robert Chen actually implemented a suggestion I'd made about improving the walking paths in the common area, adding better lighting for evening walks. The restitution checks started arriving in October, $100 a month. Each time one showed up, I thought about framing the first one as a reminder of what happens when you stand up to bullies. But that seemed petty, so I just deposited them. In December, Almost a year after the original snowstorm that had started everything, we got another massive dump of snow. This time, I bundled up and walked Max through the neighborhood, including past the common area. I made a point of carrying extra waste bags and cleaning up after him meticulously, even though with Robert Chen in charge, I wasn't worried about false accusations. As I walked past Linda's old house, I noticed it had a "for sale" sign in the yard. Her husband had apparently decided to move after everything that happened. I couldn't blame him. The neighborhood association had become a constant reminder of his wife's crimes. I thought about Linda sometimes, sitting in prison because she'd been too proud to admit her own dog was the problem. If she'd just taken responsibility, cleaned up after Duke properly, and not issued that false citation, none of this would have happened. She'd still be HOA president, probably still making people miserable, but at least she'd be free. Instead, her need to blame others and her retaliation when exposed had led to criminal charges and a prison sentence. It was a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of accountability. Max tugged on his leash, pulling me toward home. It was cold out and he'd had enough of the snow. As we walked back, I saw Robert Chen shoveling his driveway. He waved. "Hey, Paul. Good to see you out. How's Max doing?" "He's great. Getting older but still energetic enough." "That's good. Hey, I wanted to run something by you. We're thinking about setting up a neighborhood watch program, just informal, people looking out for each other. Would you be interested in helping organize it?" I thought about it. A year ago, I would have said no. I'd wanted to keep to myself, avoid HOA politics, just live my life. But everything that had happened had shown me the value of being involved, of paying attention, of not letting bad actors operate unchecked. "Yeah, I'd be interested. Let's talk about it after the holidays." "Perfect. Have a good evening, Paul." As I walked up my driveway, Max trotting beside me, I felt a sense of satisfaction that went beyond just winning my case. I'd made a difference. I'd exposed corruption. I'd helped make my community better. And I'd proven that standing up to bullies, even when it seemed like too much effort, was worth it. Inside, I hung up my coat and gave Max his dinner. He ate happily, oblivious to the fact that he'd been at the center of a neighborhood scandal that ended with criminal charges and prison time. To him, it was just another day, another walk, another meal. I made myself dinner and sat down to watch the news. There was a story about HOA disputes becoming more common across the country, about the need for better oversight and accountability. I smiled, thinking that I'd done my small part in that bigger picture. My phone buzzed with a text from Mike. "Hey, saw the for sale sign at Linda's old place. End of an era. Want to grab a beer this weekend and celebrate?" I texted back. "Sure, Saturday work. Perfect, see you then." I set my phone down and looked at Max, who was sprawled on his bed in the corner, already snoring softly. "We did good, buddy," I said quietly. "We did real good." The snow continued to fall outside, covering the neighborhood in white. But this time, I wasn't worried about false accusations or corrupt HOA presidents. I was just enjoying the peace of a quiet evening at home, knowing that justice had been served and my community was better for it. The full story of how Linda Peterson went from HOA president to convicted felon became something of a legend in Brookshire Estates. New residents would hear about it and be amazed. Longtime residents would share their own stories of Linda's overreach and express relief that those days were over. I became known as the guy who'd stood up to the HOA and won, which was a weird reputation to have but not unpleasant. People would stop me at the mailbox or in the grocery store to share their own HOA horror stories and ask for advice. I always told them the same thing: document everything, Know your rights, and don't be afraid to fight back when you're in the right. The DNA testing company, Pooh Prints, actually reached out to me in January asking if they could use my case as an example in their marketing materials. They wanted to show how their testing could be used not just by HOAs and property managers, but by homeowners defending themselves against false accusations. I agreed, and they featured my story on their website, obviously with names and specific details changed for privacy. That led to a few interview requests from local news outlets. I did one with the Maplewood Gazette, a small community newspaper. The headline was "Local Man Uses DNA Evidence to Clear His Dog, Expose HOA Corruption." It was surreal seeing my story in print, but it also felt validating. What I'd gone through mattered. It was newsworthy. It might help others in similar situations. The reporter who interviewed me, a young woman named Ashley, asked me what advice I'd give to others facing HOA disputes. I thought carefully before answering. First, know your HOA's governing documents. Actually read them. Most people don't, but they're legally binding and they outline what the HOA can and can't do. Second, document everything. Take photos, save emails, keep records. If it's not documented, it's hard to prove. Third, don't be afraid to spend money on defending yourself if you're in the right. I spent over $400 on DNA testing, but it saved me from a $300 fine and exposed much worse behavior. It was worth every penny. And finally, remember that HOA board members are just people. They're not above the law. If they abuse their power, there are consequences. Ashley scribbled notes furiously. Do you think HOAs serve a useful purpose, or should they be eliminated? I think they can serve a useful purpose when run properly. HOAs maintain common areas, organize community events, and help preserve property values. The problem is when board members let power go to their heads and start treating their neighbors like subjects instead of fellow homeowners. That's what happened with Linda Peterson. She forgot that she was supposed to serve the community, not rule it. The article came out a week later and generated a lot of discussion on social media. Some people praised me for standing up to HOA overreach. Others argued I'd gone too far, that Linda's prison sentence was excessive for what amounted to HOA drama. I tried not to engage too much with the online commentary. I told my story, the courts had made their ruling, and that was that. February came around again, marking a full year since the original citation. The neighborhood held an anniversary party, though not specifically for my case. Robert Chen had organized a winter festival to build community spirit. There was hot chocolate, a bonfire, and kids sledding on the hill near the community center. I brought Max, who enjoyed all the attention from children wanting to pet him. At one point, Robert pulled me aside. "You know, Paul, I've been thinking about everything that happened last year. If you hadn't fought that citation, Linda would probably still be president. The financial irregularities would have continued. People would still be getting arbitrary fines. You really did change this neighborhood for the better." I was just defending myself. I didn't set out to be some kind of activist. That's what makes it meaningful. You stood up for what was right even when it would have been easier to just pay the fine and move on. That takes courage. I shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. I'm stubborn. And I really don't like being falsely accused, Robert laughed. Well, your stubbornness benefited all of us. Hey, have you thought any more about the neighborhood watch idea? Yeah, I have actually. I think we should focus on building relationships between neighbors rather than just watching for problems. Maybe organize more events like this, get people talking to each other. When neighbors know each other, they naturally look out for each other. I like that. Let's set up a planning meeting. As the evening wore on and the fire burned down to embers, I found myself feeling genuinely content. I'd been through a stressful ordeal, but it had brought positive change. The neighborhood was more united, the HOA was better managed, and justice had been served. Max and I walked home through the snow, our breath making clouds in the cold air. The street lights cast yellow pools on the white ground. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear kids laughing, probably having a snowball fight. Life in Brookshire Estates had become what I'd hoped for when I first moved here 3 years ago. A quiet, friendly community where people looked out for each other. It had taken some work to get here, and an unexpected battle with a corrupt HOA president, but we'd made it. As I unlocked my front door and stomped the snow off my boots, I thought about Linda Peterson one more time. She still had about 6 months left on her prison sentence. I wondered if she'd learned anything, if she regretted her actions, if she understood how her own pride and dishonesty had destroyed her life. I hoped she had. Not because I forgave her for what she'd tried to do to me, but because change was possible. People could learn from their mistakes and become better. I'd learned from this experience. I'd become more engaged with my community, more willing to stand up for what's right, more aware of how important it is to hold people in power accountable. The next morning, I woke up to find several inches of fresh snow. Before I even had coffee, I went outside and shoveled my driveway and sidewalk. Then, because I was already out there and warmed up, I shoveled Dorothy Morrison's driveway and the sidewalk in front of the Chen family's house. When Dorothy came out later and saw her driveway clear, she called to thank me. "Paul, you didn't have to do that. I was already out there. No big deal." "It's a very big deal to me. My arthritis has been acting up and I was dreading having to shovel. Thank you." That feeling, that simple act of helping a neighbor and being appreciated for it, was worth more than all the legal victories and vindication. This was what community was supposed to be about. Not citations and fines and power struggles, but people helping people. Later that week, I got a letter from the Ohio Real Estate Commission. Robert Chen had filed a formal complaint against Linda Peterson for her conduct as HOA president. The commission was conducting an investigation and wanted my testimony and evidence. I sent them copies of everything and gave a statement over the phone. The investigation took several months, but eventually, the commission issued findings. Linda Peterson was permanently barred from serving on any HOA board in Ohio. The commission also issued new guidelines for HOA governance, emphasizing the need for proper evidence before issuing citations, transparent financial management, and clear appeals processes for homeowners. Those guidelines were sent to every registered HOA in the state. My case had literally helped change policy. It was a strange feeling, knowing that my personal dispute had led to systemic improvements that might help thousands of other homeowners. In May, I got a call from Tom Breslin. "Paul, I have some news. Linda's up for parole. She served over a year with good behavior and her lawyers petitioning for early release. The parole board wants to know if you have any objections." I thought about it for a long moment. Did I object? Linda had tried to fine me unjustly, had retaliated when exposed, had embezzled from the HOA. But she'd also been punished. She'd lost her position, been convicted, spent over a year in prison, and was paying restitution. At some point, justice had been served and revenge became unnecessary. "No objection from me," I finally said. "She's paid her debt. If the parole board thinks she's ready for release, that's their call." "That's generous of you." "It's not about generosity. It's about knowing when enough is enough. She'll have a felony record, she's barred from HOA service, and she's paying restitution. What more do I want? Her to rot in prison forever. That doesn't help anyone." Tom was quiet for a moment. You're a better person than most, Paul. I doubt that. I just know what it's like to be falsely accused. I don't want to become the kind of person who pursues vengeance beyond justice. Linda was released on parole in early June, having served 13 months of her 18-month sentence. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she and her husband had moved to Columbus, making a fresh start away from Maplewood and the memories of her downfall. I wished her well, oddly enough. I hoped she'd learned from this experience and would live a better life going forward. Holding on to anger would only hurt me, not her. Summer arrived in full force, hot and humid. The neighborhood pool opened, and Robert Chen organized a weekend where volunteers came to paint the pool house and do some landscaping improvements. I showed up with paintbrushes and spent a Saturday afternoon working alongside my neighbors, talking and laughing and building the kind of community that Linda's authoritarian approach had prevented. The common area where all the trouble had started got a makeover too. New benches, better lighting, and prominently posted waste bag dispensers for dog owners. There was even a small sign explaining that the area was maintained by HOA dues and asking everyone to be responsible. Max and I walked through there regularly now, and I always made a point of picking up after him immediately. Not because I was afraid of citations, but because it was the right thing to do. Other dog owners did the same. The area stayed clean and pleasant. One evening in late July, I was sitting on my back deck with a beer, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. Max was lying at my feet, occasionally thumping his tail when I reached down to pet him. My phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Hello. Hi, is this Paul Garrison?" A woman's voice, nervous. "Yes, who's this?" "My name is Rachel. I'm a homeowner in a neighborhood in Akron, and I'm dealing with a situation similar to what you went through. I read the article about your case and I was hoping you might have some advice." I sat up straighter. "What's going on?" She explained that her HOA president had been issuing excessive fines for minor violations, playing favorites with enforcement, and refusing to allow homeowners to contest citations. It sounded depressingly familiar. I spent the next 30 minutes walking her through what I'd learned. Document everything. Know your governing documents. Don't be afraid to push back when you're right. Consider DNA testing if there are pet-related accusations. Get legal advice early. Build support among other homeowners. The biggest thing, I told her, is not to let them intimidate you. HOA board members are just people. They have to follow the law and their own governing documents. If they're abusing their power, there are remedies. You have rights. Thank you so much. I've been feeling so alone in this, like I couldn't fight back. You're not alone, and you can fight back. It won't be easy, but it's worth it. For you and for your whole community. After we hung up, I sat there feeling oddly emotional. My experience, as frustrating and infuriating as it had been, was helping others. That meant something. That made it all worthwhile. Max nudged my hand with his nose, wanting attention. I scratched behind his ears. "You started quite a revolution, buddy, just by being innocent." He wagged his tail, completely unconcerned with his legacy. To him, the important things were dinner, walks, and belly rubs. Maybe dogs had the right idea about priorities. As fall arrived and the leaves began to change, Brookshire Estates held elections for the HOA board. 2 positions were up. Robert Chen ran unopposed for his second term as president. For the other open seat, I decided to throw my hat in the ring. Mike thought I was crazy. "After everything you went through, you want to join the HOA board." "That's exactly why I want to join. I know what bad governance looks like. I want to make sure it never happens again here." I ran on a platform of transparency, fair enforcement, and community building. My opponent was a nice guy named Frank, who'd lived in the neighborhood for 15 years, but whose main qualification seemed to be that he'd never caused any trouble. Nothing wrong with Frank, but I had experience now. I knew what mattered. Election day was in mid-October. I won with 63% of the vote. My first board meeting as an official member was surreal. I sat at the same table where, less than 2 years earlier, I'd presented evidence that cleared my name and brought down Linda Peterson. Robert Chen welcomed me officially. "Paul, we're glad to have you. Your experience and perspective will be valuable." We got to work. The meeting was productive and collaborative. We discussed actual community issues, plans for holiday decorations, the budget for next year's landscaping, a proposal to add a playground near the community center. No power trips, no arbitrary enforcement, no drama. This was what HOA governance should be. Boring, practical, focused on genuine community improvement. I loved it. As November rolled around and Thanksgiving approached, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed in less than 2 years. I'd gone from a guy who just wanted to be left alone to an active community member and HOA board member. I'd learned to stand up for myself, to fight back against injustice, and to channel that experience into positive change. The final restitution check from Linda arrived in early December. $2,200 paid in full. I deposited it and used the money to buy a really nice security camera system for my house and make a donation to the local animal shelter in Max's name. Christmas in Brookshire Estates was beautiful that year. Robert Chen had organized a neighborhood decorating contest, and people went all out with lights and displays. My house was modestly decorated, just some lights along the roofline and a wreath on the door, but I appreciated the effort everyone put in. On Christmas Eve, there was a gathering at the community center. Hot chocolate, cookies, caroling. Max came with me and was a hit with the kids as always. As I stood there singing Silent Night with my neighbors, I thought about how close I'd come to just paying that $300 fine and moving on. How different things would be if I'd done that. Linda would still be HOA president, still abusing her power. The financial embezzlement would have continued. Other homeowners would still be living under her authoritarian rule, and I would have taught myself that it's easier to give in than fight back. Instead, I'd fought. I'd won. And I'd helped make my community genuinely better. As the new year approached and 2027 arrived, I made a resolution. Not to lose weight or exercise more or any of the usual things. My resolution was simple. Stay engaged. Keep showing up. Keep fighting for what's right. Keep building the kind of community where people look out for each other. On January 20th, exactly 2 years after the snowstorm that started everything, I got an email from Pooh Prince. They were featuring my case in a presentation at a national property management conference. They wanted to know if I'd be willing to speak about my experience. I thought about it and agreed. In March, I flew to Las Vegas and spoke to a room full of property managers and HOA board members about what I'd learned. I emphasized the importance of evidence-based enforcement, the value of DNA testing for pet-related disputes, and the dangers of letting personal bias influence governance decisions. The reception was incredible. People came up afterward with questions and their own stories. Some wanted to implement DNA testing in their communities. Others wanted advice on dealing with problem board members. A few just wanted to thank me for speaking up about HOA accountability. Flying home, I felt a sense of completion. The story that began with a false accusation and a pile of dog poop in the snow had become something much bigger. It had exposed corruption, changed lives, influenced policy, and helped countless others stand up for themselves. Max was thrilled to see me when I got home, wiggling and wagging like I'd been gone for weeks instead of 2 days. I took him for a long walk through the neighborhood, past the common area where it all started, past Linda's old house with new owners who waved hello, past the community center where the HOA now governed fairly and responsibly. This was home. This was community. And this was what happened when good people refused to accept injustice and fought back against those who abused their power. It wasn't always easy, it wasn't always fun, but it was always worth it. The snow began to fall gently as Max and I walked, coating everything in white. But this time, I wasn't worried about false accusations or corrupt officials. I was just enjoying a peaceful evening walk with my dog in a neighborhood that had become everything I'd hoped it would be, and if someone tried to falsely accuse me again, well, I knew exactly what to do. Document everything, gather evidence, stand your ground, and never back down when you're in the right. That was the legacy of the great HOA dog poop war of 2026, and it was a lesson I'd carry with me forever.